Hi everyone, my name is Sam Davenport, and this is the first video, first of many, and in a project that I'm calling The Reclaimer. And this is just sort of an announcement video to talk about the project. It's a post-apocalyptic survival horror game that I've decided to make being built mostly from the ground up. And a little bit about me. I have a master's in computer engineering and computer science, in addition to a little over a decade of professional software development experience. When it comes to game development, I took a game design class in college where we exclusively used the Unity engine. And for our term projects, some friends and I, we made a simple dungeon crawler. And outside of that, I have experience making simple 2D games in C++, utilizing the SDL2 library. My interest in game development really started to take off when I discovered the Handmade Hero series by Casey Muratori. You can find them on YouTube under the channel Molly Rocket. To me, it's the best resource on game development by far. At least if you are wanting to build games from the ground up, and even if you aren't really interested in game development in terms of what goes into writing high quality software, there's probably about 1,000 hours worth of footage on that channel, and it's just an absolute treasure trove of information on how to write software, and I highly recommend checking it out. It was through that channel that I started falling down the data-oriented programming rabbit hole, and like I said, the channel is managed by Casey Muratori, but I also discovered Jonathan Blow, who's he made The Witness and Braid, and Mike Acton, who at the time was the lead engine architect for Insomniac Games, and they're very vocal about the topic of data-oriented design. If you want to know more about the topic, it's a little bit outside the scope of this video, but there's this book called Data-Oriented Design, Software Engineering for Limited Resources and Short Schedules by Richard Fabian. It's on Amazon. I highly recommend it. It's a fantastic read on how to write high-quality, low-level software. And a little bit about this game that I'm building, just sort of a synopsis of the story. So, imagine a character who wakes up in a post-apocalyptic world, originally meant to restore the Earth to its former state after a nuclear war, but to discover that life was wiped out by an outside force. And there's the concept that I'm looking to explore is how hopeless can a situation be, but still find a reason to go on, whatever that reason may be. And the format of the game in terms of how it's played is going to be third person over the shoulder. Examples of that are The Last of Us and Dead Space. And I also am a huge fan of the concept of Lovecraftian horror, where the character is more of a victim and not really a hero. Where they're experiencing things that they're just an ordinary character being thrust into extraordinary circumstances. The games by Frictional Studios are fantastic examples. Amnesia, Soma, the Sanity Mechanic, where you're experiencing things you were never meant to see, and how that affects your psyche and how your character perceives the world. It's something I'd really love to explore with this project. So in terms of the inspirations for this game, they're all over the place. Like you see, I talked about Soma, Dead Space, and you'll notice that there's 2 Matt Damon movies. It's not that I'm particularly a huge fan of Matt Damon. It's just that I loved the exosuit in Elysium, and sort of that, how hopeless can it be, but still finding a way to go on. That's sort of what's explored in The Martian. Anthony Weir said, what's the absolute worst thing that could happen to Mark Watney? I think that's what he said. But it's like, what's the worst thing that could happen at a given point, but he still be able to survive it? And that's kind of what I'm looking to explore. But by far, the biggest inspiration is the movie 9. I think Tim Burton was one of the big... he's one of the people who worked on the movie. I'm going to move my... camera up here so you can see what I'm talking about. But the line, when our world ended, their mission began. That's really a concept that I'm looking to explore, and it's just something that resonated with me and where I came up with the idea for this game. But instead, it's instead the character's more of a soldier, and he's waking up in sort of this post-apocalyptic world and trying to make sense of it. So now, what are the goals for this title? I'm going to go ahead and leave my camera up here so you can see the slides. But this is going to seem a bit daunting, but I don't want to use any licensed engines. Like I said, this is going to be mostly built from the ground up. Not to say that there won't be libraries, but I'll go into that in a moment. But I want to avoid licensing fees, whatever bugs and performance issues that are completely outside of developer control. I know there's open source engines that, you could make bug fixes and workarounds for, but I would just rather be frustrated with my code than someone else's. I would rather just have complete control over what goes into the software. And secondly, when the game is released, it's going to be 100% complete and it's going to work. There's not going to be day one patches and DLC, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't release. And I'm going to explore more on that in a moment. And lastly, I'm just one person, and I am completely aware that to make a big title, or at least, just a respected title like that, of this magnitude, that it's going to take a team of people. And when this is pitched, it's going to be a complete tangible product. So the demo is going to be playable. It's going to be tangible, and it's not just going to be a concept that I'm pitching to people. It's not going to be, this is what the player's going to feel when they're playing the game. It's going to be, play this and tell me what you think. What does it inspire? And I'm eventually going to need help because I'm not an artist. I'm a programmer. And there's so much that goes into making a game. There's so much talent that's required and so much experience for art, music, voice acting. And when it comes time to pitch the concept of this game, it's going to be something tangible that accurately captures the atmosphere and the mechanics of the game. So currently the game is written in C++, and it's mostly C architecture. The use of object-oriented principles is extremely limited. Like, I don't use virtual functions, inheritance, classes, or templates, or anything like that. I'm very performance-oriented when it comes to the game's architecture, and I would just prefer to keep things as low level and simple as possible. While I said I'm not using an engine, the libraries, there still will be library usage, just very limited. Like, I use libraries currently for managing the debug interface. IMGUI. I think the ASIMP library and the STB libraries for loading images and assets and things like that. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with those. They just, as long as they are performance oriented. But I just prefer to do custom implementations myself. In terms of platforms that it runs on, it currently only runs on Windows using the Windows API and OpenGL. And I'd like to add console support and support for other operating systems in the future. And the tools that I'm using are very simple as well. My primary editor is VS Code. I'd prefer to use something else. VS Code is kind of a bit bloated, but at least just for a simple editor. But it's the editor that I'm most productive with. And I use simple bat scripts that call MSVC from the command line. And it builds insanely fast, it runs insanely fast, and it's something that works, and that's what I'm going to stick with. And, these are all very simple free tools. Git for source control, and it's very ironic that most paid tools absolutely suck and they limit productivity, especially since the whole reason you would buy them is that they would increase productivity. And Visual Studio is by far the most popular IDE in the world, and in 2022 it's a complete house of cards that blows over and falls apart in the slightest breeze. So I just prefer to use simple tools because they keep me productive. So, what's the point? Why am I, taking on such a daunting task? Well, like most people who grew up in my generation, video games were one of my favorite pastimes. And they were also released as complete products. And, licensed engines have been around for a while. Like, Unreal was used on the original Bioshock title. And, it's been around for quite a while. And, you had the days of the 360, the PS3, and, even the PC at the time when those consoles were popular. You had games that were using licensed engines, but even still, in general, they worked out of the box. And a game got one chance. And especially, like, my first introduction to games was on the Nintendo 64, and I even had an NES that was passed down to me at the time, and I also had a Dreamcast, and on those platforms, you had physical products, like a physical disc or a cartridge that would run on a console that, out of the box, most likely did not have internet support. And, you didn't have the opportunity or the luxury to, like, as a game developer, ship out, huge, massive day one patches and DLCs. You had one chance to captivate your audience. And if it didn't work, it didn't work. And currently, the state of game development is absolutely unsustainable. Everything's about the hype train. It's about how much can we captivate our audience with concepts and ideas at, conferences, trailers, and, early access game footage and all this kinds of stuff. Massive day one patches. The games are just released in an absolutely broken state today. And there's also an overuse of third-party engines. And not that the use of engines is bad, but the market is just absolutely oversaturated with games that heavily, heavily rely on the use of third-party game engines. And so you have this, at least in my opinion, this situation where you recognize games by the engines they're used, but not by, the artistic style that a certain studio would have. And, like, don't get me wrong, like I said, the Unreal Engine is absolutely gorgeous, and Unity's come a long way as well. But there's just an increased lack of interest in understanding how things work under the hood. And so the big difference that I'm pointing out is back then, games were a complete product. They were released, you bought them, and they may or not be good. But even the bad games back then, most of them performed very well. And today, games are a promise. So gaming is more of a trust exercise. We're sold concepts to buy into, and we're expected to just trust the game studios that develop these things, that they're eventually going to live up to the promise that we were given. And even the best titles today are riddled with bugs and performance issues. And it can be done. Like, it's a huge, daunting task, but that doesn't mean it's impossible. This is how things used to be done back in the day. And even, and way back in the day, C compilers could cost thousands of dollars. Now you can just download Visual Studio Community Edition and have access to the C and C++ developer tools for absolutely free. And like I said, the Handmade Hero series, in my mind, it's the best resource on game development in terms of, doing things this way. And, everybody likes to, hop aboard the hype train, or at least try to get people to hop aboard their hype train, with these revolutionary concepts. Well, there's nothing revolutionary about what I'm doing. It's just an old school way of doing things. And revolutionary is being done all the time today, but it's just not working. So, for instance, there's a few, revolutionary titles that I can think of. No Man's Sky, where you were supposed to have, like, 2 to the 64th unique planets to discover and explore. Fallout 76, Cyberpunk 2077 Halo Infinite. All of these games were an absolute mess when they came out, but they came with massive promises that were just absolutely let down. And Fallout 76 is a big one in my mind, because there's literally not a single thing that the Fallout 76 team got right. Even down to the merchandise that was released with exclusive game bundles that were recalled because of serious issues, or customers were flat out lied to about the products that they were getting. Like, they bought a canvas tote bag and were given a nylon one. Like, it was an actual bait and switch, and it was literally not a thing that they got right. So all of these titles are all hype and no substance. And there's a resurgence in how the way things used to be done. And small teams and individuals, not just when it comes to games, but software in general, they're absolutely destroying big name studios. Like, you have people working on code editors and debuggers, being made by individuals with full-time jobs who only do things in their spare time. And the metrics for their software are absolutely destroying products that have been managed for decades, like Visual Studio, for instance. And in terms of what I'm doing, I'm just one more guy who's giving it a shot. So I just wanted to make this video to serve as the official announcement for the development of the Reclaimer. So this is, I guess, DevLog 0. If you stuck with me through this, just thank you so much for tuning in. There's going to be a lot more content coming soon. In the next video, I'm going to be going through the current code base and just sort of talking about the architecture of the program so far. And I know that everybody has their different opinions on how what's the best way to write games, and what tools should be used and what things should and should not be done. And it's not my intention to step on toes or offend anybody. It's just the way that I'm going to be looking into doing things. And like I said before, games back in the day, they had their chance, and they may or may not work, or they may or may not be good games, but they worked. And regardless of how this project turns out, I'm gonna release, I'm just gonna keep taking an iterative approach and doing the next step. And if it works, it works, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. And I'm not asking for support at all. If you want to give support, the best thing that you could do is just give a like and subscribe to the channel, because there's going to be a lot more coming in the future. And I haven't really done any live streams before, but if there's an interest in that, I'd love to look into it. And just, thank you for tuning in. And this is Sam Davenport signing out, and I'll see you in the next video.